This week, I am joined by Jeff Mann for the Enterprise Security News and subsequent segment that we have today. In the news, I'm going to talk about Ping Identity. I am also with Jeff going to talk about AppDynamics, eSentire, Carbon Black, and a big announcement from two companies, one of which is IBM, in a talk about acquisitions. In our technical segment, we're going to discuss some open source and free collaboration security tools for project planning. As you embark on your technical projects, you need a foundation. I have built such foundation that I believe helps us do that, and wanted to share that with our audience. So stay tuned for all that and more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, your contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observit combats insider threats by detecting risk activity, investigating in minutes, effectively responding, and stopping data lost. Give it a test drive at observit.com/Security Weekly. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome to episode 123 of Enterprise Security Weekly for January 24th, 2018. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Jeff Mann. Jeff, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Fun to be on Enterprise Security Weekly. What do I do this, like maybe once or twice a year?
Yes, thank you for filling in today.
Sure, I will try to refrain from bringing up my favorite topic with every story we tell.
Yeah. I don't think there's any. I mean, I think that would be a stretch for the stories we have, but you never know.
You'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised. That's right. So RSA is coming up March 4th through the 8th. You can go to rsaconference.com/security-weekly-US19. Register now and use the discount code 5U9SWFD and receive $100 off a conference pass. If you're interested in booking an interview or briefing with Security Weekly, please go to securityweekly.com/conference request. You can submit your request there for a free briefing, a paid interview, or there's one other option on there. I don't remember what it is. In any case, a remote briefing. I think, remote free briefing. So briefings are free, interviews are paid. securityweekly.com/conference request. If you work for a security vendor and would like to see representation with Security Weekly, make sure that you do that, as slots are filling up very fast. All righty. Jeff, we've got some stories to talk about. I think I just want to start with the big one. And that the headline was heading into the clouds. IBM has signed a deal. I'm not sure how official this was. I just saw it today. IBM has signed a $325 million deal with Juniper Networks.
Yeah, your tagline said something about acquisition, and I think it's simply they inked a deal. And in fact, when I was reading through the article, the opening sentence talks about what you just read, the value of it. And at first, I couldn't tell whether Juniper was paying IBM or IBM is paying Juniper. I think Juniper has hired IBM to help them with their cloud services.
Okay, that makes sense.
If I read it correctly.
Yeah, because I thought IBM buying Juniper Networks for that amount was really low. That's very low.
That would probably make a few shareholders unhappy. Low.
Yes. Yeah. All shareholders.
Yep.
Yeah. So it is an agreement to build out a cloud, apparently.
Well, it said something about supporting their infrastructure, and they mentioned help desk, support systems, and data centers. So,
Mm-hmm.
and of course they mentioned Watson. So
Of course.
they're trying to apply. I don't know which way IBM leans, AI or ML. And I was at their user conference 2 years ago, and I met Watson. So, whatever you call it, they're trying to apply that type of technology to improve what I would call sort of the back end operations of a cloud service.
It sounds like that. Yes.
Yep.
So yeah, that's not as interesting as I thought it was going to be. That's like
Oh, well.
I'm kind of disappointed, to be honest with you, Jeff.
Well, all I can say is PCI.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Right.
That's really kind of boring, actually. So, Ping Identity is offering advanced API cyber protection. Jeff, do you have API cyber protection? Because apparently it's important.
Yeah, one of these days I got to ask somebody what an API actually is or what it looks like. When I was doing this stuff, we didn't call it API. I suspect it used to have another name.
Yeah, and again, I think API is an overloaded term. I think that there's certainly needs there from a security perspective, of course, but
Yes.
I think it's similar to the confusion when we use the term VPN, right? As in, is it a VPN that's terminating in my internal network and allowing my employees to access resources? Or is it a VPN that I just subscribe to on the internet and I'm going up through their cloud and their infrastructure and they're encrypting my data through the internet as basically a privacy and type of thing, right?
In fact, reading through these articles ahead of time and actually prior to when I was responding to the bat signal saying help, we need somebody else to help host today, and was waiting for the topics. One of the things I was thinking about was just basically the terminology that we use and the definitions of the terms that we use, because we throw so many terms around in our space, and we assume that everybody defines the terms the same way we do, and that. But I have found in my experience, if you have in-depth conversations with people and dig into what are you talking about, how do you define that term, very often they have a hard time just really nailing a short working definition that they think anybody that anybody can agree to. It's a lot of it's everybody knows the reason for that. And that's extended into things like the term VPN. What you described initially as sort of allowing remote users into your network. That's what I think of. I think VPN, but obviously that has been sort of superseded in a lot of ways with the whole notion of sort of becoming an anonymization way of protecting your privacy and being out on the interwebs.
Yeah.
So. And nothing is right or wrong. I just think it's important to, when you're having conversations and you're using terminology, I don't think it hurts to ask the question, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. And so when I think of API, I really think of, well, I mean, it's really two different scenarios, but it could almost be three. So we'll go with three. I'll see if I can back that up. So the first is the one where most solutions are being applied is I've written software internally, custom software, right? And I've provided an API for other systems and software packages to integrate or interact with my custom written software, right? And that does require some security in your SDLC and also some guidance that when I do write an API, am I securing it the same way in terms of authentication as I would when a user logs in, right? So is it encrypted, right? Is there some type of encryption that's being provided over that API to secure those API calls and data that may be pulled out of or sent to the application via the API? But this is all internally written is the use case. There's some great companies providing security in this space. I want to get it right. It's SALT protection, right? That's the one. SALT protection, because there's another one that a different salt. That's a different type of software. Both great companies in my assessment so far. They're both salt something, so it's tough to sometimes keep them differentiated. They do very different things. Salt protection, I believe, is the API, right? For ones that you write yourself. Now,
right.
The other area that might arise, will stick internally as well, is that I've got software that I've purchased or stood up, in-house. I mean, that could even be, operating system applications, right? Like I've got my SIM and I've got, other, keep it to security, other security systems. They all have, most of them have an API interface, and I may have software that interacts with them. I may link two of those solutions together via their respective APIs. And that requires a different level of security because it's maybe still on my internal network. It's stuff that I own, but it's not stuff that I've written. I don't have control of the code for that API. And therefore, I have to manage the security of, in other words, when I pull data out of my SIM to send it to an analysis station that then is maybe creating a ticket through another API, how do I make sure that process is, in fact, secure from authentication to privacy, integrity, the whole thing, right?
Right. Yep.
The other thing is maybe the APIs are somewhere up on the cloud. It's a SaaS provider. It's some other type of cloud services such as Amazon. Now, this largely is an extension of what you'd have on your network. It's just up in the cloud. It's the same kind of things. There are different security concerns, whether you're the organization that has written the software or you're a user of that software. For example, in IoT, the way that devices talk to the cloud, provider that also allows you to interact on your cell phone or via an app is usually all through maybe multiple APIs, right? So those communications have to be secure. If you have some kind of cloud service, you may have written something that's interfacing with a cloud service type of API. I mean, that could be even a threat feed that you bought or is free that has an API that you're pulling the threat feed down from, right? So it's an external entity that you don't control and you're pulling it down. Or in the case of IoT, I think of SmartThings, I think is a pretty good example, right? They have a device that goes in your network, a physical device, that talks wirelessly via multiple protocols to devices in your home. Your SmartThings then communicates to the cloud, to Samsung, essentially. That's who owns SmartThings, for various things that you don't really have control over. But then when you use their mobile app, that mobile app is using an API to connect to the cloud as well. So all those things need some level of security.
Right. So let me say back to you what I heard you say, and let's see how well you spoke and I listened. How's that? What I get out of what you described is what an API is it's and I'm somewhat using my archaic language from back in the day, but to me it's more like a bridge. It's a way for different programs to communicate to with each other, or outputs of one program to be able to be input into another. It's almost like a translator. It makes sure that communications can happen between things that speak different languages, have different outputs.
Yeah, programmatically interface with an application. It's called an application programming interface, right? But programmatically be able to interact in some way with
and do it in a way that's perhaps interactive, perhaps interpretive, perhaps doesn't have to be rewritten every time you introduce some new kind of application on one end or the other. There's some way that it just kind of adapts and grows.
You hope.
You hope. And I would guess that in the history of APIs, when they were first written, they were written to solve a problem, and nobody thought twice about security, and probably nobody even thought about inheriting the security from the source, or thinking about the the security on the destination. What are the ramifications of that? And so security, as is usually the case in our world, was an afterthought. And so a whole industry has emerged on, this thing that we wrote that solved a problem introduces a security problem. That's never happened before in our industry.
Right, yeah, because it's really about, when we talk about user credentials and they interface with a system, right, that's one problem. But now when I have an application that essentially needs to do maybe some of the same things that a user would do, but do it in an automated fashion, that software program doesn't necessarily have someone sitting behind the keyboard, right? So you have to, and I think that's where Ping comes in, is allowing you to securely manage your programs that are interfacing with your APIs. I'm not sure which scenario, but I write a program that interfaces, with my SIM. There needs to be, the SIM needs to say, is this program authorized? What is this program authorized to do? What data can it access? How does it maintain that authentication? When does it rekey, right? And there's other systems that can have a vault that allows you to manage that a little better as well. And I think that's where Ping is coming in, is helping you identify and authenticate things to your API.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it looks like it's your third option where they're offering it, as a cloud service.
Sure.
So, and my initial thought on this article was, you could almost do the buzzword bingo based on this one article. But again, if these are the buzzwords that are familiar with people that are looking to solve a problem in this particular area, then maybe it's beneficial. But to me, my first time I read through it, it just seemed like they were throwing everything in the kitchen sink in just to see what would stick. But you did a very good job of explaining what you think is the application and utility of this solution.
Interesting. Speaking of older acquisitions, Cisco, just before AppDynamics was actually reported to IPO, Cisco, according to the article, swooped in, wrote them a check for $3.7 billion, and they're still going strong today, doing what their CEO says is monitor your technology wherever it lives in the enterprise, from serverless to mainframe. And I have to say right there, I wish more articles were articulate like this, where I can really get the gist of it. I mean, they even got a screenshot, which is awesome. And what I really think that the problem they're solving, which again is pretty apparent from reading the article, which is awesome, it doesn't always happen that way, is, and I've talked about this in the context of our sponsor Signal Sciences, right? For so long, so I'll use an example. Long ago, I was a systems administrator, and the software company was creating Java server-based back then client and server-based applications, right? And when I first started as sysadmin, I was like, all right, I got to set up systems and firewalls, and I know that there's a log of everything happening on the system. I know that I can put this additional software. Jeff, I mean, AuditD's been around forever, right, on Unix systems, right? I can look and see what's happening in all these processes. When something crashes, I know that I have a core dump, right? And then we had these Java applications.
I took a core dump this morning.
There you go. Yes, it's good for you. So then we've got these other applications, like let's say Java, for example. And how do I know what it's doing? Like, where does it write its log of what's happening inside the application? How do I know, for example, that user A logged in with a session ID and user B logged in with a different session ID, but somewhere user A was able to take over user B's session? Is there a log of that? If so, how do you monitor it when it comes to custom applications? Either the developer had to build something in that writes out a log, but as your application changes, so does the code inside of your app that actually logs it, right? If you've done any programming before, very basic logging is print statements to the screen if you're debugging something. More advanced is you've got some kind of logging service. But as you write code, things aren't usually logged by default. So if I write an entirely new function to handle user sessions, as the programmer, I got to make sure that stuff's logged. And if it's not, then I don't have a complete picture of what's happening on the system. What I like about Signal Sciences and AppDynamics seems to be in a similar monitoring kind of fashion in the monitoring aspect of it, allowing you to monitor what's happening in your application, hopefully without having the programmer to have to remember to put additional code or call functions within the app. And that's been a struggle for a long time, but I think technology has evolved, such as AppDynamics, which might explain some of their success in solving that specific problem, which I think we've come a long way in the past 20 years.
Yeah, when I looked at this article, I had two initial thoughts, and in listening to you, your summation of it's kind of given me a third thought. My first thought was when they said, how did they put it, serverless and server environment or whatever it was. My first response was, what about endpoints? Because I'm dealing with a customer right now that's struggling with getting any type of visibility from logs off their endpoints, and it's a PCI customer, so their endpoints are effectively point of sale systems, payment applications. My second thought was, looking at the graphic that they provided, the screenshot, and if we're going to have a theme today, it's going to be on the definitions of terms. They describe them as saying we're helping you with the root cause. We're helping you to do the forensics, if you will, and try to make some educated guess as to what went wrong or what's causing the problem, which I think is great. When I hear root cause, I immediately think of process failure. I try to teach my customers all the time. If you find a system, back even to our Tenable days, if you run a scan and you find a vulnerability and the vulnerability is 3 years old, the root cause isn't somebody forgot to patch this machine. The root cause is a process failure that failed to get the patch out to that machine, but probably more importantly, B, failed to detect that the patch hadn't made it to that machine, or other than doing some periodic scan. Root cause, I think, in a lot of people's contexts that are troubleshooters, troubleshooting network, troubleshooting performance, troubleshooting, why is this thing not working? They don't really care about process. They care about getting the thing up and running. Yes. So in that context, it makes sense. But again, different terms have different meanings to different people. And at this point, I forgot what the third thing was that you said.
No, that's okay. You made me I had a thought last night, or I think laying in bed, and I was like thinking about actually the next time we're going to talk about some of the tools and troubleshooting, largely because my furnace that's less than a year old is experiencing problems. Now, me as a customer, like, I understand, right? Like, there's a supplier, there's a manufacturer, there's the installer, and the installer's like freaking out. Like, he thinks I'm going to freak out on him at any moment. I'm like, dude, I've been in your exact situation. Freaking out doesn't solve anyone's issues, right? Like, you're taking information from your supplier, you're giving information to your supplier, you're relaying that to me, and they're doing a great job. But go back to your root cause. You want to know that, sure, it's one thing to fix a problem, right? But it's another thing to know exactly what caused that issue, so that not only can you fix it, but you can put safeguards in so that that problem doesn't reoccur in the future, right?
Oh, and I've got a great example of that. Years ago, when I was working for VeriSign and our PCI practice got acquired by AT&T, we went through the onboarding process, and we had this big, huge PowerPoint deck that had all the details of everything you need to do to, make sure you're on the network, make sure you get a laptop, make sure you get I think we were using RSA tokens back then, make sure, how to get your business cards and so on and so forth, sign up for healthcare and benefits and all that kind of stuff. So when I went to and I'll try to make this quick. When I went to get the business card, there was a web app that you went to, and I would go through it. You'd build your business card. It would show you what it looked like, and you would essentially check out, and it would process the order. Well, it kept crapping out and failing, and I kept, I'd wait a week and try it again, failed. When I finally called help desk. And there's a whole story that I like to tell about calling the AT&T help desk and going through it took me 45 minutes to get to somebody that actually knew it. But when I finally got to the person that could help me fix the problem, he said, oh, well, the root cause, and he didn't say root cause, but the root cause was the program that they were running was written for, I think at the time it was IE7. And at the time, the corporate standard for Internet Explorer was 6. So they were screwed out of the gate. But so he went and told me, go to your internet options, open this, scroll down, click this, go over, check this box, uncheck this box. And he went through this litany of like 10 or 15 things I had to do. And my thought was, gosh, how long did it take you guys to figure out that this was the problem?
Right.
So they had fixed the root cause problem, by making it work, but somebody had the sense enough, which I commend them for, to like write it down, and they knew exactly what they needed to do to fix the problem, and it was fixed in no time. But notwithstanding the 45 minutes it took to get to the right person, and how many wrong paths I went down on the phone tree trying to get to them.
Yeah, and one thing that I was thinking of, actually, in context of my furnace, but I'm like, wow, this would really help us troubleshoot problems in general, was like a Kanban board, basically, of like one column is like things that we've observed as broken. The other is things that we tried that,
right.
And other column is things that it's definitely not because we tried something and proved that it's definitely not. Then the other column is things that could potentially be wrong. And I need to refine this. And I'm sure, actually, if I searched online, I'd probably find some examples of using a Kanban board for troubleshooting. It probably already exists. I don't think I am the first person to ever think of that. But going through troubleshooting, I thought that was a really great kind of guide to put in to do your troubleshooting, is, list out all the things you tried, the things you haven't tried, where the problems definitely are not because you've proved those theories wrong, and then a list of things to try. And hopefully the end result of that is what you're talking about, Jeff, the root cause of it, right? And that's helping you get to the root cause of that. So,
well, if nothing else, it helps you with the efficiency of knowing what you've tried and what you haven't tried.
Yes.
I see the exact same thing. In my role as a QSA, I would always have to review pen test reports. I was just looking at one a couple weeks ago, and the pen test report, and I can paraphrase it, said, we were hired to do a pen test. We did the pen test, and we found these 2 things wrong. Fix them, and you're good. And I'm like, what did you try that didn't work? Where are they good?
Yes.
How do, what did you try at all? Just tell, and notoriously the 2 findings looked a whole lot like Nessus output, but that's another story.
Yeah, it's a totally different issue, right?
But, document your work. I think, just about anything we do, it's important to document successes and failures, things you've tried that worked, things you tried that didn't work, because that gives you a more complete picture of what you're dealing with. Another example, I was at a client site looking at a system, and we looked at their antivirus tool and noticed on the device that we were looking at that the antivirus was out of date. Now, that happens all the time. But so I said, well, let's look at a couple of other systems, and all the other systems were working fine and everything was current. Now, I have this knack for picking the one, and I didn't even pick the system. They picked the system, but we happened to stumble upon a system that had an issue with updating their virus signature. And what I'm trying to help them with is, what do you do with that? One thing, obviously they need to get it working, but I also want them, getting back to the root cause thing, try to help understand, again, not only why it was failing, but also why did nobody detect that it was failing? Yeah,
and that's more of the problem that you need to solve, right? I think it comes back to what problem are we trying to solve, right? And it's like, and if we want to make sure everything is up to date. Well, the real problem is our process to detect when something's out of date is broken, right?
Right.
Yeah, totally agree. eSentire, just a couple, 2 more stories left here. Jeff, was a light week for stories. eSentire has announced a managed endpoint defense that's powered by Carbon Black. And here's where you see MSPs and MSSPs supporting various endpoint security providers, right? So that if you're a company, you go buy a endpoint solution of some kind, and then if you don't want to manage it yourself, which in a lot of cases I think makes a lot of sense, you go find a company to help you manage that. Now, there's a lot of issues with that, right? Because the MSP doesn't really control the software, another company is, so you're still managing two different providers. And then what if you want to swap out your endpoint defense, but your MSP doesn't support what you want to move to? Now you've got to change your provider for your endpoint software and your MSP to manage it. So there's some issues with that. I'm not saying it like never works, but I actually did a technical demo briefing with a company called Lima Charlie, which is actually an open source solution that went closed source, or went commercial, and they've built a solution for managing your endpoints and collecting data and doing forensics. Right. And what I like about it is very extensible and flexible, and a project that I recognized in the past as being really cool to be able to pull forensics data from all of your endpoints. And they're looking to help solve that problem where this is easy to implement, easy to scale, and you're not stuck with one provider for one reason or the other, that you can use this as kind of a generic endpoint kind of defense to query your endpoints. You may have other technology too, but I thought that was really cool and kind of highlighted for me some of the issues that you do run into when you've got a provider for your endpoint security, you've got a provider for your MSP, and then like, what if you want to switch, right? So
right. Carbon Black I encountered probably 6 or 7 years ago, where it was, and I don't know if they called themselves next gen back then or not, but they were sort of they came on the PCI scene as a way to address some of the difficulties of doing the traditional security things on endpoints. Again, endpoints particularly that are point of sale systems, I guess my first question when I read this article is, can they address point of sale systems? I ran into somebody, I want to say it was a Wild West Hackin' Fest, that I think he works at Carbon Black, and I was asking him the same question. Well, whatever their latest and greatest is, does it run on? And I think I was naming some specific operating systems that I know the point of sale systems that I'm dealing with my customer are running on. And he's going to get back to me on that. I need to ping him on it. But in looking at this article, I remember the third point from the earlier article, and it sort of kind of ties together in terms of this thing next gen. When we were talking about logging before, and some of the difficulties of logging and then troubleshooting and finding root cause, what happens when and again, I'm thinking from a PCI perspective, what happens when the classical ways that we think of collecting logs and collecting events on operating systems, primarily, event logs, syslogs, OS level, what happens when they're largely not there, when the only account on a system is really the application service account, and the activity that we're looking for that used to be done by an admin is now being done by a process or a sub-process within the application? What happens when the way things used to be done change, but you still have to sort of cover the same requirements, like a logging requirement, or meet the spirit of, you want to know what's going on in your network. Same thing here with antivirus and next generation, sort of the shifting ways that antivirus in its original form, signature based, finding permutations and writing a signature to try to keep up with all the different variations and mutations that are out there, versus what companies like Carbon Black are trying to do with approaching the problem from a different vantage point, trying to come up with a different way of solving the problem.
Yeah. I also think too, what I've heard about Carbon Black is that it does benefit from management, that when configured correctly, it causes huge problems for attackers. And so I think that in some cases that might be the best solution for folks, is to have someone else manage it. We've talked about that, in the past on the show. What's interesting is, Jeff, I think you and I have had this conversation about like, what is a solution? versus a product versus a feature.
And I caught myself using the term solution
No.
earlier.
I wasn't. It was in reference to our next story where Cohesity has developed the first modern backup solution that prevents, detects, and responds to ransomware attacks. I went back to our original conversation, Jeff, about this product solution feature, and was like, well, if you got a backup provider, to me, that's just a feature, right? Like, it's making backups. It makes sense that if there is a backup that's being maybe uploaded to your backup provider, whether on premises or in the cloud, if that new backup is encrypted but the old one's not, that could be a red flag, right? Could be a red flag. You might do something different. You might alert. I don't think that this is a huge step. I think that a backup solution in and of itself is a good defense against ransomware. However, unless the attack is really nefarious and is cutting you off from your backup provider, encrypting all of the backups, deleting all of the old backups, encrypting it, and then uploading the new one. So there are ways to get around this. I hope that a feature of your backup provider is to prevent against those style attacks. But I think these are now features that we have to expect from our backup provider, because I think that a backup is a really good defense against ransomware.
It's absolutely a good defense. And I keep thinking, for so many companies out there that got bitten or have been bitten by ransomware, if they only were backing up,
right.
So it's one thing to get the companies to actually do backups, whether they're managed or whether they do it themselves. And it makes sense, I think, to probably in most cases to use a third party, move the backups offsite or whatever. So a company like this that's coming in and trying to find some nuanced fine tuning, I chuckle a little bit because I'm like, geez, most of the companies I work with, they're not even backing up. So it's a feature / luxury that, I'm still trying to get, companies that I work with to do the baby steps fundamentals.
Yep. I did have known there about Beyond Trust. I'm not sure what the announcement was, but Baumgar, of course, acquired Beyond Trust as well as a few others, and thought it was interesting. They've got a feature announcement. I don't think it's anything earth-shattering. Power rules to speed endpoint privilege management decisions. It'll be interesting to watch and see how they merge all of those companies together in a more cohesive story. This does look to be specific to the actual Beyond Trust product.
Right. Well, and I'm going to sound like a broken record. They said endpoint, so my question is, does it work on a point of sale?
Yeah, that's and you'll support along those lines, Jeff, for older and different operating systems in endpoint solutions, I guess we could call them in general, it's all over the map, really. And I think you got to put your requirements together and go shopping. And just based on operating system support, you're going to already just limit your options down from the 100+ vendors that have some type of endpoint presence, down to a much more manageable amount based on your. And then you gotta take into account that your requirements might change, right? Do you want to limit your vendor selection to what you have today versus if if we do spend the next 6 months, we can get rid of this older operating system perhaps, and now our requirements change and we've got a few more options that might be better for us moving forward. So all things to take into consideration.
I'll refrain from the PCI angle on that. Let's move on.
All righty. With that, we're going to take a short break, come back, and talk about tools, open source and free, that you can use to collaborate on your security teams. Stay tuned.